Circa 2012, I was in combat training with the Marine Corps in Southern California on fire watch one night, roughly 2 a.m., with 2 Navajo guys. We got on the subject of Skinwalkers and telling stories that our grandparents or others had told us. So we're all generally feeling a little creeped out just from the stories when we hear the most distorted coyote howl any of us had ever heard from what we could guess was about 50 yards away. It was like if someone was slowing down a vinyl recording of a coyote howl with their finger. We were all frozen in stark white. We just all stared at each other for a bit, sweating. We finally pointed our flashlights in the direction of the distorted howl, and we all saw what looked like a coyote head sitting on a fence post. We were just staring at it in the shaky lights, absolutely silent. The head was pointed our direction, and its eyes were open, but they didn't shine. They were just black. Finally, I say, maybe someone found a dead coyote and put its head on the post? Sometimes farmers will hang a dead coyote on a fence to keep other coyotes away. Our training was taking place on large open cattle fields. Right after I say that, the head turns slightly to the left and moves off the post. From behind the post, a coyote walks out on its hind legs with its jaw and tongue dangling like they were broken, and then just walks into the darkness out of reach of our flashlights. We all immediately shit our actual pants and book it back to where everyone was sleeping and proceeded to not sleep properly for the rest of our time out there. All 3 of us saw it, and all 3 of us know what we saw. Moral of the story: speak of the devil, and he shall appear. To set the scene, this is the night of my 13th or 14th birthday. Can't remember exactly. Me and a group of friends were walking around my neighborhood, getting up to your standard middle school antics, blasting rap, shit-talking other kids, and doing a little ding-dong ditching. My neighborhood is a square, and it takes about 10 minutes to complete a lap. On one of our laps, I noticed a man standing still, staring directly into the passenger window of a car. I'd passed this house before many times, and had never seen this car or man there before. In fact, I don't recall ever seeing any cars or signs of people living there prior to this. The driveways in my neighborhood were about 40 to 50 feet long, and he stood all the way in the back, illuminated by an outside light above the garage. He was in my sight for about 30 seconds before we passed him, and in that time, he didn't seem to move a muscle. No breathing was evident, no unsteadiness in his stance. He stood there with a bit of a slouched posture, almost in a dejected way, like he was upset and would react intensely if we interacted with him. I thought this was weird, but didn't mention it to any of my friends. We kept going, and eventually we were inevitably brought back to the same house. The man was still there, but he was now standing on the driver's side, but at the front tire, not in line with the window like before. He stared straight ahead with the same stiffness as before. Clearly, he wasn't looking at the car. He was looking into nothing. I should note now that at no point did I get a clear look at his head in these 2 encounters. You would think that would be a normal part of observing someone, but I could only bring myself to look at his torso. Like my brain instinctively averted my gaze without me realizing. This time, my friends noticed. We were walking normally, chatting away, but clearly a bit less carefree. Again, we hadn't said a word about the man yet, but we all felt the same fear, almost like an oppressive presence that we didn't want to disrespect. Once we were directly across the street, in a single moment, we all stopped walking or speaking. The only way I can describe the feeling I had and the looks we shared to each other was that we had no choice but to stop, like we were in trouble and had to face the consequences. We all looked at each other, silently deciding who would be the one to speak first. And mind you, we were a group of assholes who had become accustomed to being scolded by adults, like most cocky teenagers. I had never seen my friends become so prey-like before or after this. My friend glumly seized the opportunity and let out a shaky childlike hello in the direction of the man. There was a few seconds of nothing, and then the man turned his head to us, offering our first sight that this was really a living thing. This was the first time I looked at his head. As he turned, the shape of his head changed, like an optical illusion. It was like his head was a crystal that refracted light differently as you turned it. My brain simply couldn't process what shape it was. He stood directly across from the light, but the way it interacted with his face distorted it rather than revealed it. Without saying a word, our group took off sprinting, like our brains had all chosen flight as our only option to survive. We didn't stop until we reached my house. We all talked about it, and we found we all shared the same feeling, raw primal fear, and none of us could ever make out his face despite the bright light shining on him. My friends left after a parent came to pick them up, and on the way out they passed the house again, no car and no man in sight. We never discussed this again, and I truly forgot about this until now. I really can't believe it never got brought up, and I don't remember ever looking at that house again. It feels like my brain hid the memory, but guided me away from the site of this encounter. So that's my story. If anyone has any theories, I'd love to hear them. This happened a few years ago, when me and my friends were in our junior year of high school, around 2018. There's a Dow National Forest area, northwest of our small western Colorado hometown, that used to be Ute land before the Meeker massacre happened and the natives were forced from the land. Being teenagers, we would frequent this area in our trucks to have bonfires, shoot targets, drink, smoke, fornicate, etc., without having to worry about law enforcement crashing our party. One night, we were having a small bonfire with a group of 4 of my close friends. Pretty quiet night. I had picked everyone up in my pickup truck, so it was the only vehicle available, and the road to the clearing was a bit treacherous, so we had to be very careful to not get stuck in the mud or trees. Throughout the night, we kept hearing what sounded somewhat like an owl, but almost like someone impersonating an owl. On top of that, owls are fairly rare in this part of Colorado. It's a very dry climate, more home to vultures and mountain lions. We heard the noise around 5 times throughout a 1-hour span, and it quickly devolved from a hoo hoo to just a singular hoo noise, similar to a gorilla sound. At this point, we were concerned, and one of my buddies taunted whatever was making the noise by repeating it back into the tree line. At this point, the sound was immediately repeated, much louder than before, as if it was just behind the tree line. We shit ourselves and everyone scrambled to the truck. I hauled ass as much as possible back to the main road. The main road was still washboard gravel, so I tried my best to channel my inner rally car driver to get us the hell out of there. On the drive down the mountain, one of my friends was riding shotgun, and the rest were sitting in the bed facing backwards. As we rounded a curve, chaos ensued. I heard screaming from the bed of the truck, and my friend sitting shotgun nearly shit herself about whatever the hell was happening back there. Instinctively, I slammed on the brakes and looked in the rear view. I didn't get a good look, but I can only describe it as a skinny, hairy humanoid creature with an arched back, sprinting across the road behind the truck on all 4s. No coordination to its movement. It moved as if it was an old man trying to bear crawl at 2 times video speed. I barely had time to process before I was being screamed at to hit the gas. We finally got off the mountain, and my friends in the back of the truck appeared shell-shocked. I asked them if they saw what I saw, and they refused to answer, only saying, "Get us the F out of here." It was only afterwards, when we were at our friend's house, when they felt comfortable talking about what they saw, and everyone described it the same way. All fours, fast as hell and humanoid. 2 of the 3 described it as having long, creepy-ass fingers, eyes locked on the truck as it crossed the road. They say they saw trees and bushes moving as we drove down, as if it were trying to catch up to us. 4 years later, and the story still makes my hair stand on end when I tell it. In addition, other weird things began to happen in that forest after nightfall. We personally encountered a goat that had been killed by something, feet straight up in the air, stomach slashed in 6 equal cuts, and head nowhere to be found. I moved out of that town 3 years ago, but whenever I come back to visit, it creeps me out. I refuse to enter that area after dark, even towards sunset. Let me know what you guys think. This happened to me in January of 2019 in western North Carolina, around the small town of Silva. I was participating in a week-long program to get certified as a first responder for wilderness first aid and rescue. I'm studying to become a forester, and it's important to know how to keep people alive in the woods when things go wrong. There are 2 primary locations in the complex: a classroom with some bathrooms, and a kitchen where we spent most of the day in class and ate meals, and a group of 1-room cabins on top of a steep hill directly north of the classroom where we would sleep. An important thing to note about the cabins is the heating system. Each cabin has a small but powerful radiator in it that makes the cabin feel like a sauna I've left on for too long. Since it was January in the Appalachians, it was pretty chilly outside at night, so the heat was needed. In order to strike balance between boiling in our beds and getting hypothermia, we would turn on the radiator and leave a window open so that warm and cold air could circulate and create a reasonable temperature. The radiator and the open window were at the front of the cabin next to the door, and my bed was directly across from the window. The incident happened on the 5th day, a Thursday, of my time there. My boyfriend and I, who was enrolled in the program with me, had settled down for the night in the cabin we shared with 1 other person. We had gone to sleep as normal and were sleeping soundly on 2 bunks that were pushed together so we could sleep next to each other. Sometime during the night, I was woken up by some shuffling on the other side of the room near the window. I heard my boyfriend say in a complaining voice, "Can't we close this window? I wake up feeling frozen." I woke up more and sat up in my bed groggily. I was about to answer him when I heard another voice say, "If we close the window, it'll get too hot and we'll wake up sweaty." I snapped awake and froze where I was sitting. The voice that had responded was my voice. There's something very strange and wrong in hearing your own voice repeated back at you. In the dark, I looked down next to me where I saw my boyfriend sleeping soundly. At this point, a mortal dread had a tight grip on my chest, and I forced myself to not move or even blink. I was focused intently on the place near the window, fearfully anticipating more of my own words. I heard more shuffling outside the window, and my same words were repeated. "If we close the window, it'll get too hot and we'll wake up sweaty." Followed quickly by my boyfriend's voice again. "Can't we close this window? I wake up feeling frozen." Towards the end of the last repetition of my boyfriend's words, there seemed to be an unevenness in the enunciation, like raising and lowering the pitch slightly. I remained frozen in my bed, feeling my hand fall asleep in my propped-up position. I sat there for what felt like 15 or 20 minutes, listening to whatever it was shuffle around in front of our window, separated from me by some odd 10 feet in window mesh. Eventually, the shuffling became more frequent, and a weird mumbling sound came from outside the window, with no real words being said, or none that I could make out. This particular behavior didn't last long before the shuffling sound moved to the left of the window to the door, where a scratching sound began to manifest. As the sound moved, I saw the silhouette of a medium height, 5'6", figure that moved in an uncanny way, like when a baby animal tries to walk for the first time, but isn't quite strong enough to stand up correctly. It sounded like someone was scraping some dry sticks against the wood of the door, not aggressively, but kind of like an impatient dog asking to be let in. The scratching slowly moved around the cabin, stopping when it reached the wall that I was closest to. My ears were strained to hear anything that might indicate further action, but all I could hear were footsteps on the dry leaves. The footsteps eventually moved away from the cabin and down the other side of the hill, and didn't return for the rest of the night. I stayed unmoving from my position for at least another half an hour before my body readjusted itself slightly, letting blood flow back into my asleep limbs. I was wide awake until my boyfriend's and other roommates' alarm went off sometime before dawn to get ready for the day, which felt like maybe 2 hours, but I couldn't be certain because I didn't have a clock. My boyfriend was surprised that I was awake before him, as I'm typically a later sleeper, but I just told him his alarm woke me up and tried to act somewhat normal. We got up and got ready for our day, but I refused to leave the cabin until the sun began to peek over the mountains. For the rest of the week, I was on edge and felt like there were eyes on me whenever it was relatively dark out, though I'm not sure how much of that was raw paranoia. In the day following the incident at night, I had realized the lines that were repeated to me by the voice were a part of a conversation that my boyfriend and I had had earlier in the week, and I came to the conclusion that whatever it was had been outside our cabin and heard us talking. This scared me a great deal, as I also realized that it had likely been lurking there in the following nights as well without us realizing it, and might do so again for our remaining nights, though it ended up not coming back. I waited to tell my boyfriend about this until we had left the program because he scares easy and was already a little wary of walking in the woods at night up to the cabins. It should be noted that I know this to not be a sleep paralysis experience, as I've had them before and they were nothing like this, not to mention I was able to move. I'm posting this here also as a means of asking for advice, in addition to getting it off my chest, as this winter I'll have to return to the same location to renew my certification, and I want to know as much as I can, so I can hopefully avoid another encounter. So this happened to me and a few friends of mine on Halloween night, maybe 6 years ago. We got together to have a few drinks in a house that was abandoned mid-construction on a neighborhood on the outskirts of town, surrounded by fields and orchards. The friend that drove us there parked his car in the area destined to be the garage of the house, so we went upstairs to a small room and started drinking and talking. The night was strange from the get-go. We started hearing noises all over the house, like footsteps and stones and other debris hitting the floor. We also found a dead torn-up cat in one of the rooms upstairs. So after a couple hours, we decided to leave. As the 5 of us got to the ground floor, we felt or heard something behind us. We all looked to the door that led to the back of the house, which was just an empty field. And in the blink of an eye, we all saw something between 1.8 and 2 meters tall. It looked very dark in color and humanoid in shape. As soon as we turned around, it cleared the door's opening faster than humanly possible, and we lost sight of it. We just bolted to the car and got out of there. Even now, we still talk about it when we get together. Has anyone seen something similar? A couple of years ago, I volunteered to help out at a store way out of my itinerary. I usually commuted from the Hartford area to Springfield, Massachusetts for work, but a store in our chain needed help, and I felt like an adventure away from my norm. The store was a lot further than anticipated, and after a blah day, I set out for home. Problem was, it was October, and the sun was gone by 8 p.m., a full moon to boot, and the road home runs by a state forest with little illumination for drivers. I generally don't like driving at night. I can't see very well. Because of this, I like using my high beams. After about 45 minutes of driving in darkness with barely any street lights, the full moon lighting the areas my high beams can't reach, I was already apprehensive. No cars on the road but me. Slowly driving because I'm afraid of some dead man's curve or something. I see in the road a dead deer. I just drive around it and the smell was pretty bad. And just as the smell drifted out of my car, which was pretty distracting, something was in front of me on the passenger side running. It ran on 2 legs, but had a gait that made it look like it was on 4 at certain times. It was human-like in skin color, but had almost a hunchy spiny back and bald head. As soon as I got close enough to see it, it veered sharply into the woods. I did not movie cliche into a stop or look in the rearview mirror. I just got sick to my stomach and kept driving. I told my wife when I got home, and then I went straight to bed and decided never to take that route again. Last year, on Saturday, June 27th, my paranoia was at its peak. My friends wanted me to come pick them up, go to McDonald's in the nearest town, and then drive around on country back roads. Because of my paranoia, I had my mom walk me outside to my car, and I had my dad watch out through the window to make sure my mom was safe going back into the house. I also had them lock the doors. My paranoia was really bad that entire summer. I picked up my friends, went to McDonald's, and started riding around country roads. This is something we did often, because there's not much to do in our village in the St. Louis Metro East. We were coming back into town sometime between midnight and 1 a.m., and we noticed the moon appeared red. We started talking about it, and we began arguing about what effects a red moon has on people. Just as we started getting loud, we saw a creature on the side of the road. It seemed to be humanoid, but its forearms were much longer than its upper arms. It was very pale, almost grayish in color with no hair. The fingers were very long and pointy, maybe claws. It also appeared to be very malnourished. We could see its rib cage. It was crouched down next to a telephone pole just as we were coming into town. I slammed on the brakes and turned on my brights to get a better look at it. It looked at us and then zoomed up the pole faster than what should be physically possible. It was like a beam of light. We all went silent and started discussing what we had just seen. We all agreed we had seen the same thing. All of our descriptions were the same. Just up the road was the friend's house we were going to. They had to run in to grab some stuff, so I stayed in the car with the doors locked and my eyes closed. When they came back outside, we backed out of the driveway to head to my house, which is right down the street, and we saw it behind us, standing in the middle of the road, looking at us. My house is only a couple blocks away, so when we got there, we ran inside as fast as we could. We locked the doors and stayed at my house for a while, before I eventually gave them a ride back to their house a couple hours later. I'm a 43-year-old man, a former Marine with a lot of time at sea, and a former railroader, so I've been to a lot of places that are just hard to get to for most folks. I've never seen anything like what we saw last night, and it happened on Highway 50 in between Penrose and Pueblo, Colorado. My wife was working a closing shift in Cannon City last night. I left Pueblo and made the drive west as usual. After she clocked out, we went to pick up our son from his job, only to find he wasn't working last night. On the drive back from Cannon, you pass Penrose, and then there's a place I've always called the Big Hole. The big hole is actually called Pierce Gulch. There's a significant drop in elevation, and then you immediately climb back out, hence the nickname. As we were approaching Big Hole at about 12:40 a.m., something traveling from north to south crossed all 4 lanes and median of Highway 50 at an incredible rate of speed. We were the only vehicle out there at this time of night, and we nearly hit it. It was roughly 3 feet tall and had long brown hair everywhere. And again, this thing was hauling ass, faster than any animal I'd ever seen or heard of. My wife was driving and had our son on speakerphone. She startled and looked at me as if to ask what the hell was that. By this time, we were down in the bottom of the gulch and headed back up the hill. We told our son what we saw and she got off the call. We discussed it for a second and decided to go back and see if maybe I'd gotten caught in the barbed wire fence or something. Maybe there were some traces of this thing. We were both amazed by how fast it was moving. By 12:45, we had traveled back to the west side of the gulch and turned around. There wasn't any traffic, so my wife just slowly rolled down the shoulder of the highway, and I had my window down and was shining a flashlight that I had in the car out into the field. There isn't much out there except cactus and stuff. As we came up on the approximate area we saw this thing, I told my wife, "Hey, look, do you see those eyes?" She said yes and stopped the car. 10 yards or so on the other side of the fence was a pair of very bright, very blue eyes, not far off the ground. I was thinking we probably were looking at a coyote or something. It was looking directly back at us. What happened next, I will never forget as long as I live. Whatever those eyes belonged to stood up like a man, like a 6.5 to 7 foot man. They were still looking at us. Whatever it was that flew across the road at like Mach 2, this was it. This was the hairy thing we saw. There was a moment of disbelief and shock, and then it registered that we found the thing, and it wasn't just some animal. The fear kicked in. I told my wife, "Go, go, go, just get out of here." It seemed like slow motion. She floored the gas, and the thing watched us leave. We already knew that this thing was incredibly fast, so she drove as fast as she could up and out of the gulch, and I was looking out the back window and checking mirrors. My wife was afraid it might be following us. It wasn't, and I didn't want to make things worse by admitting that I was worried too. We drove very fast for several minutes. We talked, but it was like we were talking to ourselves, like, "Oh my God, what the hell was that? And was it waiting for us?" Soon the lights from Pueblo West were ahead, and we were back in civilization. Once we got into the city, we finally started to relax a little. We talked until we got home, and then checked the car for anything. We couldn't really go to sleep for hours. My wife got online and was searching for anything that matched the creature we saw. She found some stories, paranormal in nature, of other people witnessing a creature that sounded exactly like the one we had seen. She has to work the same shift tonight, so on our way out to Cannon City, we're going to stop and go out into the field where we saw the thing and see if there's any evidence, footprints or hair or something. I'll update this if I find anything unusual.